Hi there and welcome along to today's webinar. And just to make sure that you're in the right place today, the topic of today's webinar is looking at remote teams and the things to consider if you are thinking about closing your office. So while we wait for a few people to join us today, why don't you just navigate your way to the chat box to the bottom right of your screen and pop in there and tell me whether you are working from your home office today or whether you've returned to your organisational office and you're back in an environment with other people. Perfect. We're here for about 45, well not about, we are here for 45 minutes today, and we'll get started in a couple of minutes and we will conclude today's session at 1:15. During today's webinar, we won't be able to see or hear you, so no need to worry about your camera or your microphone. But please do use the chat box at any time throughout today's session, and then towards the end, Nina will be able to answer all of your questions. After today's session, we're also going to share with you the slides from today, but I would really encourage you to take notes throughout the session anyway. It's always good to write down and really sink into memory the things that I've really paid attention to. The other thing that I want to just say is your connectivity today. In order to maximize internet, I would recommend that you close all the other programs on your computer, so less distractions and more internet bandwidth for the good stuff. And then if you experience any glitches today, let's close out of your webinar and then hop back in again using the link that you've used to hop in today. Usually that just resets it. All right, shall we get started? It's my pleasure to introduce you to Nina Fountain. Nina has founded the hidden secrets of genuine workplace flexibility through her workplace culture agency, Transform Teams. Nina has been leading the way through workplace disruption since 2011, and she champions the win-win of flexibility for remote working for both workplaces and individuals. Nina, over to you.
Thank you. It is brilliant to be here, and I'm really just thrilled to be able to talk about this topic. As we're looking together at this, we've got an opportunity to speak together for about 20 minutes or so while I'll give some content. We'll do some question and answers and talk through the issues around this together for your particular questions. Then I'll close off with about 5 minutes at the end, some parting thoughts, and that's when we'll also talk about one of the key concepts. So we're all thinking at the moment about the role of the office. What is it going to look like to work flexibly, to work remotely, to work in a post-COVID or even a during COVID-19 kind of world? And what does this mean for us? And I think one of the big questions that I'm hearing from employers and from people around this issue globally in Australia and New Zealand is that there seems to be an appetite for a new normal. So we're going to work on the basis that that you are pretty much at the point where you recognise that the office has changed and that the way that the office will feature in your business and in the work that you do going forward has altered at this point. And we're going to look at, once you've made that decision, how do you actually get that that high-performing team that is a remote team that could be an effective alternative. So let's have a look at that. Have a look at that now, and I'll give you a bit of background on me. So I manage a remote team. We are based in Wellington. That's me. Lower Hutt, still Wellington. Levin, 2 hours north, and San Francisco. And during this time, my team have all worked from home during COVID-19 because I set the team up to be distributed right from the get-go. I have actually been working in remote teams and flexible work since 2011. And in that time, I've been in a variety of different roles. I was the coordinator, manager, strategist of the telework campaign in Australia in 2011 for the Australian government, and worked really closely with some leading employers who were looking at how they could get a flexible and remote workplace to work for them, and how could these things actually factor into a future that was a sustainable business for them. So employers like Cisco, Microsoft, Xero, and in that process, we also did some research. We looked at challenges, we looked at opportunities in this style of work. And since then, I've been working very closely with employers who are working in a flexible and remote kind of way. So I know that that the concept of digitized office or office optional is not a new one, and it's been really amazing to be around these successful employers who are making it work. One of the things I've noticed is that where there's a conversation happening around the rest of the world is starting to catch up now, and I think some of those employers who are in that position are thinking that the edge that they had perhaps in the employment market is not quite there anymore, but there's so much else that's available, even if it's not that attraction and retention edge for an employer who goes this way. So we're going to look at what some of those details are. So the world of remote work is definitely more agile. We're breaking the traditional model, and some organisations that are working this way are really what is common is that they're ready to take advantage of a new approach. But the question is really for us, as we hear people saying that they love working from home, can this be a viable, sustainable way of working going forward? And we're talking about high-performing remote teams, so a healthy team that lasts the distance. And one of the constant things I notice is that that people who are leading these teams need to be ready to take an interest in their team. So we're not talking about squeezing blood out of a stone to get the most performance out of people, the most incredible superhuman efforts. We're talking instead about being the kind of employer who builds trust and establishes a really long-term, successful relationship with their employees, because they have reasonable expectations, but also they're setting up the conditions for high performance. So we won't be talking today about how to get the most out of people as a short-term gain today. And if that's what you're thinking about, then the webinar's not for you. We're really talking about the kind of employment relationship where you are absolutely investing in your team. That's where high-performing teams come from. So what is possible? When you look into the stats around this, the organisations that have been able to get some good data around it, it's a difficult thing to do because human nature is complex and the interactions are complex. But when you look at engagement, so that concept of satisfaction, loyalty, and commitment, which we associate with high-performing teams, the companies that have those more engaged employees, according to Gallup, so this is a really nicely established piece of research, a really large organisation with a successful history of looking at this question particularly, they have discovered that companies with more engaged employees saw their earnings per share grow more than 4 times that of their competitors. And they also see 21% higher profitability. And I'm going to share a local example of something like that with you in the next few minutes. So if you are a leader who wants to do the right thing by your people to get these results, or while getting these results, then that's what we're talking through. So we'll be talking about how to decide whether a remote team could be viable for your business in the long term, the role of meeting together and what that means, and the ideal ratio of office time to remote time. And I am curious to know what role remote work played in your business prior to COVID-19. I imagine that there could be a variety of different options there. It could be that you were always 100% distributed. It could be that working remotely is completely new to you. It could be that you've had some people working from home 1 or 2 days per week, or you have a significant number of people working from home 3 to 4 days per week during COVID-19. So feel free to get in touch with me afterwards. I would love to hear what your situation has been. And in that context, you might be curious to know about some of the employers who I've seen and worked with who are experimenting with remote work. And so within Australia and New Zealand, I've worked with the public service, small businesses, large businesses. You'll recognise Xero there. They were one of my first clients. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency has published my framework around which establishes the key conditions for success for flexible employment. So how does an organisation set up flexible work so that it's a strategic advantage for them? That's now also being used by the New Zealand State Services Commission. They've adopted that basic framework and altered that for the New Zealand environment. And a number of different employers there, kind of large and small. So I'm really thrilled to share with you the lessons and the learnings over these last 9 years in this space. And I think one of the key things to consider, let's just start there. If you've decided to close the office, some of these might already be top of mind for you. But I'll talk you through a case study that where we got some great results for a client doing exactly that. And these are some of the things that they thought about. So that where do we receive our post parcels and visitors if we no longer have a physical space? What's going to be the impact for our clients in terms of the time and the place when they can reach us? That can actually usually be a positive impact because people could be available across more of the city and across more of the day for a contact centre type arrangement. And does our technology enable our team? So can you do video conferences and can you do video catch-ups? And then this one line down the bottom is actually really meaningful. And so we're going to delve into that. Are you developing each of the key elements of high-performing remote teamwork? So this is a model of high-performing remote teams, which I will unpack for you. So it's rather small on the page there, but you'll notice that there's a number of layers, and each of these is where you need to focus your efforts. So now we'll go through a checklist of have you got these things in place. And something to remember here is that the soft stuff is the hard stuff. So this is a comment that I had from a client this week who's in the technology space and recognises that there's 3 legs of the stool in their space. So they're looking for technology, they're looking for a workplace that sets it up well, and they're also looking for this people and culture aspect, that soft stuff is actually what enables it and what makes it work. And so we'll just pop through that there. So we're stepping through the 7 elements, the 7 checklist elements for whether you've got an effective remote team. And physical and psychological safety is right at the beginning. So before you get to even ask if people will come on board with your enterprise, they need to know that they are safe. And people tend to start out with an expectation of this, but but it can be eroded, especially in remote teams. So people get fewer cues about their safety. They see body language less. They may hear tone of voice very infrequently, especially if there's a tendency to use text-based communication. And without that interaction, the turn-taking type of conversations, this concept of safety and trust can be really affected. So often people have worked in low trust environments, so they know the cues to look out for, and if they see something that looks a little bit like that, but they don't get as much information, people crave certainty so much that they will fill the void, and often that'll end up being a negative inference, because people would even rather make a negative statement in their mind that that's something that they can believe than the positive. It's just a curious fact about human nature. Sheryl Sandberg, I was about to call her Sandra. Sheryl Sandberg refers to that in her book, which is a really interesting comment. So this concept of psychological safety is that feeling that it's okay to make a mistake or to suggest something crazy, you won't be shamed or punished. So it's a basic level of acceptance about that person as a human being. So the question is your team an environment where people can take a risk by bringing their whole selves to work so that they feel safe? That's the first. Can you tick that box and say, yes, that's absolutely true? Then another problem in remote teams is that people are not mind readers. So if you sat your team down today and asked them the purpose of your organisation, what would they say? So the purpose is where you're going in the direction of travel. And when you have that clear purpose, you have a really clear why, that answers for people, why should I put in the extra effort that it takes to work remotely? And what about your strategy? Do you know the key decisions that you need to make to realise your purpose, and are they communicated across the team? In a remote team, people are often more autonomous, and remote team managers who try to micromanage quickly find that they struggle. I remember one manager said to me, I'm an absolute advocate for working from home, but I was hearing from the team that she was a micromanager, and it turned out that she would only allow 1 day a week working from home because there was just too much to be across. And when you micromanage, that's what happens. So we need to be able to free people up to work autonomously. And if they can be very clear about why they're on this bus and where the bus is going at a high level, then they can start to respond as we want them to in the situations that come up with clients, and with decisions to make around how resources are used and all kinds of things. So we need to ask this question: do we have a really crystal clear purpose and a strategy that's been communicated to the team? In a remote team, often the risk is that goals are undefined, and that means that the work is undefined. And people can go off on their own goals and use that work time for some of their own interests. So setting team goals in this context absolutely makes sense. It's one of the things that you read about high-performing teams, that teams that are pulling together in the same direction with a common shared goal, so not individual goals, but actually team goals. That means that people will be much more likely to really achieve and to do great work. And people do want to achieve at work. So sometimes I see leaders pulling back from really setting really clear expectations or setting really clear goals. But that's just not a luxury that you have in a remote team. You need to absolutely be sure that your team have really clear goals that are team bound so that they can get on and do those pieces of work. Now, I'm not sure if this one is actually going to come up because it seems to be having trouble loading. And it is having trouble loading. So I'm going to just take you to the next one there, and we'll talk about what was on that slide. So that slide was about communication, and it's absolutely key. In fact, a lot of the advice or the noise, I'll say, that there's good advice out there for sure, and there's also a lot of people wading into to want to give good advice, but some of that comes down to just get the technology in place or or a limited view on things. But people do tend to talk about communication as the main thing with remote teams. And it's no coincidence I came to this with a communication sciences background. So I've got an honours applied science degree in the science of communication. And I found this a really fascinating area where there's so much potential for us to do better, because when we understand communication, the ins and outs of it, we can manage it better. Once we see that communication is not just that word, there's actually a lot of different elements to it which all need to be managed individually, then we can get really good at managing communication. So one of the key frameworks which was on this slide is 3Cs. So the communication information flow aspect. So we tend to think about communication as passing on a message. Yes, it's got that element to it, but then collaboration needs to be managed differently, especially in a remote team. And then connection, which is really key for engagement. So working with a client at the moment who's doing this incredibly well. They are enabling their team to meet frequently. They've encouraged different ways to share personal stories and insights, and they're making it fun, and it's being encouraged from the top down that people would take that time to connect. And that's something I think up until now, a lot of businesses have really focused mainly on the work and not on the communication aspect. But this is an area where we can, we're starting to see that shift, especially around that connection. So let's talk about defined roles and responsibilities. So the risk in a remote team is that people kind of think they know what they're meant to be doing, but not exactly. And you can see how all these other elements we've talked about set them up for success. But if we don't take this almost final step and define the roles and the responsibilities, then it's very hard to check with someone whether what they've done is actually what you wanted them to do. So that's the next layer around accountability too. But it needs to be crystal clear who's doing what. And I had this in my own team recently. I brought someone on, and 4 weeks in, she said, it would be really great to know what this other person does. And I realized, made the wrong assumption. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect either. That my manager of that role was going to do that induction and say where everyone sits and who they are. But that manager hadn't done that. So so there she was, left in the dark, and it wasn't until she said it at 3 different meetings that I realised that she still wasn't getting that information. And in a remote team, you can't just pop your head up and look over the desk or quickly, duck over to somebody. So it's a little bit harder sometimes. You don't know someone doesn't know if they're stepping out of line if they go and ask that question. So we've just got to make these things really crystal clear. And then accountability for outcomes. This is almost the last thing to think about, and that is, do you have clear accountability for outcomes which is transparent across the team? So one of the problems that remote teams have is that it's hard to see where the work is and whether people are contributing to the work. And that can be incredibly demoralizing for high performers, the ones who want to do a good job. So they're in it for the team, and when they see that others may not be, it's really hard for them. Excuse me. And remember what we said around people creating negative stories just to get certainty. So it needs to be really obvious where the work is and who's doing what. And that's why we have these great tools like Asana, Basecamp, Teamwork is my preference, that make it really easy to track and easy to see where the work is, not as a micromanaging monitoring element, but because we know it's harder to get that information in any other way that you would have got if you were co-located. And then just to show you this last outer layer here, back to the model, is trust. And trust, we use a model unique to transform teams. So trust in a work environment is based around your intentions, your competence, and your reliability. And I'm happy to take you through that at another time. But all of those elements there are hung together by a solid experience of trust. So you've got to have that safety, which we associate with trust to start with, before people will even get into the rest of the layers and really commit to the rest of the layers. But also, trust is kind of, there's this duality about it where trust is also what holds everything together. So yeah, it's a complex one. So in terms of remote teams, we need to make the effort. But say you had, let's assume that you've decided that an office is optional in your particular team, and you can tick all of those things and say we're heading in the right direction with our high-performing team. Well, these are the kinds of savings you could make if you were a business with an average salary of, say, $57,000. About, I think I worked it out on the basis of a $57,142 average. And say you were spending around $500,000 each year on salary. So you've got a smallish team of about kind of 7 or 8 people. There's 2 ROI calculators that you can use that are out there that will help you to establish this for your own business. The Remote Work Summit ROI calculator, and then the Global Workplace Analytics calculator. Now, they have been around for years and they have an incredibly well-established base of research, so they're a great place to go. And that's the one where you can get really tailored information. So using those, I actually got very similar results. If that business decided to go remote, they would save about $100,000 each year. So one of them was $100,006 and the other one was $103,977. So even though they're different tools and they do have different calculations behind them, they came up with a similar number, which I thought was really interesting. And so say that business paid their staff to work together, paid for their staff to work together at a co-working centre. 1 day per week. So there's the fully remote option on the left-hand side. And then imagine that you decided that you did need your staff to come together for some of the time. So you would use a co-working centre. I can see that question there about repeat the calculators again. Happy to do that, and also to send the links with the slides afterwards. So just to repeat them, that is the remoteworksummit.com ROI calculator and globalworkplaceanalytics.com as well. So say you look at that scenario on the right, and that rate between, say, an average rate for Wellington co-working centres, which range between about $16 and $45 a day based on the pricing of 3 major Wellington providers. That would cost on average, say, around $30 per day per person, or $10,248 per year. So one of those major providers does require a 2-year commitment. But their prices are lower than that average. So look, I think that's a safe average to go with. And then if you had a conservative 3 days working from home and 2 days co-working, you would still save about $50,000 per year. So a lot of the benefit there, not all of the benefit, the different calculators have different estimates, but some of that benefit is from productivity. So the productivity question is a really key one, and that does come down to the right ratio for the business. So we'll get to that shortly. Here are some examples of local companies that are going remote. Westpac is considering having their IT staff working remotely. Company X offered remote work before COVID-19. Animation Research Limited is providing graphics to PGA broadcasts, and they are currently remote. And Westpac and Versa employs around 50 people based in Melbourne, and they have staff from all over the world. So they're already remote, but they also adopted the 4-day work week several years ago. And Kath told me recently that they tripled their profits, the year they started, and doubled their revenue. Also, their sick days increased. So she said it's been incredibly gratifying to have the benefits back to their culture, but they've also experienced these incredible bottom line benefits. So I had a similar situation with a client, a small self-funded membership business wanted to transition their office to being 100% distributed. And the CEO was, one of the main things they wanted to achieve was better attraction. They were in a rural area, and he wanted to get a really high-performing CEO for the role. So we did a remote team master plan with them, plus. So the remote team master plan includes the capability check, manager support, team member training, facilitated team co-design sessions, support with setting up a home office, check-ins with the team, and then a team charter documenting their agreed way of working. So that's something we still offer. Plus, we did with this particular business problem-solving workshops, updating their performance management framework, introducing new tech, one-on-one coaching, and work health and safety checks. And when they needed to recruit a new CEO, Chris called me to say, I've got a new problem. I've got far too many good candidates to choose from, and I'm having trouble shortlisting them. So as well as being able to close their office, they were able to attract a really high caliber of person to their key roles. So we're going to take questions now just for about the next 8 minutes or so. And then I'll finish up in the last 5 minutes by answering that key question around the ideal ratio of office to remote time and giving you a few parting thoughts as you take these ideas away. So you are welcome to, Sandra's going to facilitate us through the questions. You're welcome to pop your questions into the chat or listen to the questions that others are asking.
Great. Thanks, Nina. There's one question that I've got here.
Yeah.
And it's, we're going into an employer's market. So why should I put the effort into creating a high performance team when I have a larger pool of people that I can go choose from?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really key, isn't it? Because it does take more effort to have a high performing team. And it does take, it's a long-term investment. And that's, I think, really key, is that people will be thinking right now about short-term needs and how to survive in the short term. But in fact, building a high-performing team is something that's absolutely worth the effort. So and will last you into the long term as well. So I'm reading Andrew Barnes' book at the moment, and he is the CEO of Perpetual Guardian, where they introduced the 4-day work week, and it made the news internationally. He was invited to speak at some of the really prominent international meetings. I think it was even Davos, the Economic Forum. So he really caused a stir with this 4-day work week concept. And he says that there's nothing better for your business than to be able to actually lead your team into greater productivity. But that's one of the things that people with great successful businesses do, is they look for ways to be productive. And anyone who's ever been through a retrenchment or seen people micromanage their staff has seen that the short-term, apparently quick win ways of achieving productivity are really fruitless in the long term. They destroy relationships and that contract of expectations that people have with their employer, that they're going to be in a safe environment. It doesn't mean that those things can't happen. It's all about the way that they happen and the trust in that relationship. And that does come down to communication and leadership and these other aspects. But those are the things, in my view, now is the time to really double down on thinking long term and thinking, have I got the right things in place to be successful as a team? Because if I'm not focusing there, whichever team I end up with in 3-6 months' time, even though we might still be in business, could be such a fragmented version of a team that it'll be so hard to build something from there going forward. So, so I think whoever you're bringing on board, you want them to be in this mindset and this high-performing, committed to your business mindset. There's really no other way to go.
Yeah. Nice, Nina. All right, another question just popped in. Has the option of serviced offices regarded positive and cost-effective post-COVID?
Has it been regarded as positive? It's interesting. I've been asking around a little bit about this, and I think that people haven't quite got there yet in their thinking. But in my view, I absolutely think that co-working centres are going to be popping up and popular. I think that we're hearing about commercial real estate being under stress, and people. I've got a client I'm talking to, a potential client I'm talking to at the moment, where they are looking at they were looking at 3 office locations that they've decided that they won't need anymore because they're going to reconfigure the office that they have right now. So they've already been making steps towards activity-based working, which is a way to intensify that space. And then if you imagine they complement that with working in a co-working centre and or enabling people to work from home, that's a fantastic productive picture, because there's fewer costs, there's greater choice, and that leads to greater individual productivity. As long as obviously you're getting all of these things right around how you manage the teamwork and the culture. So yeah, I think there's going to be a real role for co-working centres going forward, and we might be surprised. Who can read the future? But we might be surprised at just how important they become.
And how do you think hot desking plays into that? So maybe rather than a serviced office, but if an organisation was to downsize their existing office but move into more hot desking, do you think that has got a place to play post-COVID?
Yeah, hot desking is a really interesting one. It's fascinating because when we started out on the activity-based working journey, so I've had the good fortune of working with Feldhone, and Feldhone, I could pull down the book here, but I'm not sure I've got it handy. But Feldhone actually were the creators of activity-based working, and I've had the good fortune of training their team on some of these concepts around how you create a stickable environment. And in the original concept of it, hot desking was really very quick moments where you sit down at a touchdown desk. You have your laptop and you're just there for like half an hour or an hour between meetings, and that's what you're doing. And so the concept has morphed over time and become something where people are referring to unallocated desks as hot desks. And if we talk about unallocated desks and that experience of just being on unallocated desks, those environments, there's research that goes pro and con, but there's plenty of cons about the distractions, the lack of productivity, the interruptions that people experience throughout the day, and how much that affects productivity. So actual activity-based working environments that are set up properly usually have these dedicated spaces. Often it's the home office environment where people can go and concentrate and get quiet and do the deeper work. So yeah, a hot desking environment in and of itself is actually a recipe for bad work when it comes to knowledge work, because knowledge work, any work that we can do at a computer, we need not just have our brains engaged, but we need to be really focused, and you want people who are committed to the work. So I think hot desking gets at that problem of you could call it a hygiene factor, really, of like, is this a decent environment that it's down to that physical and psychological safety? Is this a decent environment that you're asking people to work in? And yeah, I think that there'll be less, good employers, let's say, would recognize that there's less benefit in the long run from a hot desking environment than there is from just having a decent environments, including working from home, that give people a chance to work productively. Long answer, but yeah, I think it's fascinating how hot desking has taken off. And it's not, if you try to design an environment for good culture, you wouldn't start with hot desking.
Yeah. We've got time for one more question. So let's look at this one, which is about productivity. My team has seemed productive enough for the last couple of months, but what if that productivity drops off? How can I know if that's happening?
Yeah, so that can happen. I think we might be, it's interesting that level 2s happen now, because I think there is a possibility that while people are working from home, it's almost like coming back into the office a little bit has come at just the right time, because typically I see that, you know, there's about 2, maybe 3 months where people go okay, and then things can start to drop off, and that absolutely can happen. So that's where the accountability for outcomes and transparency around what people are achieving is really critical. And we work with teams as leaders to help them to clarify what those productivity measures are, because that's one of the key ways that you manage the work in this environment. So that's why we've got that built into the model there. So really, really critical that we do know what productivity looks like, and it's going to be different in lots of different circumstances. It's a notoriously difficult thing to establish, but we've got to do that hard work and establish it. So shall I move on to just these last thoughts now, Sandra?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So the concept of an ideal ratio for working in the office and then working remotely is something I've noticed over the years, that every team has an ideal ratio of that time spent together, the co-located time, to the time spent apart. So for some, it might be once every few weeks they need to get together. For others, it'll be 2 days a week. For others, 3 days a week. But it is rare that teams would work well in the long term if they are never co-located. So that getting together is really key at some points. Just depends on the team around what the right rhythm will be. So I really don't know of a single remote business that doesn't make sure to bring their people together at regular intervals. And that ratio does depend on a number of different factors. So there are 12 of them, but to give you a taste, to get you thinking, 3 of them are the answers to these questions. So what is the degree of interaction required with your customers and stakeholders? How easy or difficult is it to measure each individual's work? And how long have your team members worked with you? So 3 of those, the factors are around interaction, the degree of interaction needed, the ease of measurement or the difficulty of measuring the work, and then the length of time that team members have worked with the business, and the culture familiarity and the team familiarity that they have. So as you're thinking about those questions in your own context, I also want to give you one final question to think about, to hopefully inspire you that the right mindset can go a long way towards success. So perspective has an enormous impact on our ability to get through challenges. And this is the Highland High School rugby team in the US. They have won 40 times more often than they have lost. So this is a documented stat. Over 36 years, they have had only 10 losses, and they've had 20 national championships. So the coach describes it this way as, we always win. And by winning, he means we always ask that question, what's important now? So what's important now might actually be to consider carefully how to be successful over the next 4 months or 3 months or 6 months. And sometimes we need to take that moment to be able to pause and reflect, to get that perspective and to think about these things. And so you may have a way that you do that with a cup of coffee in the morning, or a sketch pad, or getting down to the water. But one of the things we need to think about right now is how can we turn our attention and our thoughts to something that's going to rise above the panic, if you like, and really be an action that supports our leadership. And then I would also like to ask how we can support you to confidently disrupt your team's work style. So if that's something you would like us to do, or even just like to explore it, then we can have a 30-minute phone call by video or phone, and we can talk about your situation and give you some advice on the direction to take. So the link is in the chat. Thanks, Sandra. And that's where it will take you to straight through to the calendar options on my screen, on that screen there. And also when you leave today's webinar, our contact page will load so that it's easy to find us, and you can get the Calendly link there as well. So that's it from me. Thank you so much. I think Sandra's going to close us out.
Perfect. Thanks, Nina. That was a really informative presentation. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Like I said at the beginning, we're going to share the slides from today's presentation with you, so keep an eye out on your email for that. I hope you took lots of notes, and do take advantage of booking some time in with Nina and her calendar to chat further. So keep an eye out. We will be returning next month with another webinar from Transformed Teams. But for us today, that's us. We will see you again next month. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Thanks.